This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Authority 480 herbicide from FMC. Authority 480 herbicide provides extended activity on the toughest weeds like kochia, wild buckwheat, cleavers, Russian thistle, and many more. See your local retailer today for more information.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is time for Tuesdays with Lyndsey, and today's show is actually very special. It's brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. So later in the program, we are going to hear from Koch Agronomic Services. We're going to talk about protecting nitrogen fertilizer against losses. Yes, huge topic, a very important one. So one we will delve into in our product spotlight. But of course, we've got lots more on today's show. You're going to hear from Stuart Chutter with AFSC, talking about an insurance product that's helping a lot of farmers and ranchers in Alberta manage for significant drought. So that is super cool. I've also got a clip from Ag Days in Brandon. So Kelvin Heppner caught up with Ground Truth Ag to talk about a new piece of equipment that they're putting out there that is actually essentially trying to not quite do entire grain grading at the combine on the workbench, but is bringing us a lot closer to having instant results on our grain grading. And the idea of where this technology could go really has no bounds. And so you really stick around for that discussion. It's pretty interesting what is already possible and, of course, what the company is hoping to do looking forward. So that could be things like being able to identify frost damage kernels or all sorts of different things. Yes, potentially one day right at the combine. So very cool there. Stick around for that. And then it is Tuesday, which means yesterday I hosted the Agronomists, and Drs. Dave Hooker and Bobbi Helgason joined me for a fascinating discussion on the power of rotation. Now, we know that crops grown in a rotation, meaning 3 or more crop types grown over 3 years, have yield benefits. We know that the science is quite clear. The adding 1, 2, 3 more crops to a rotation can not just add yield potentially across the board, or if you add it up over those 4 or 5 years, doesn't just add yield necessarily, but it also potentially adds a certain level of stress tolerance year over year for any crop that's grown on that land. Why did I put it that way? So that's a key observation that we came to last night, is that we've always sort of thought about the impact of rotation on the above ground plant. But really what's happening is it's the below ground changes that happen in a diverse cropping system that are actually supporting plant growth. So that's why I asked Bobbi Helgason to be part of the discussion. She's a soil microbiologist, and she helps to break down just what changes below ground when you've got year over year different rooting systems, different rooting types that actually, yes, build soil organic matter, that builds soil water holding capacity, and all those microbes in healthy populations help to release some of what's in the soil for the plants. And so in times of extreme dryness, we might still have better yields off of those acres that have a good cropping history, meaning 3, 4, 5 different crops in rotation. For Ontario, it's largely 3. And there were some really good conversations last night. A lot of questions about, is adding a cover crop in just as good as a year of wheat? We had some discussion on that. But also looking at, under the Western Canadian system, do we need really deep-rooted, sunflowers? Or what about the question of adding something like alfalfa into rotation as well? So we unpack all of that. Super keen to share some of that with you. We'll do that right after the break. And of course, you can always head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists or head over to our YouTube channel to check out the entire thing. So fascinating discussion, super cool. So I grabbed a snippet of it here. Okay, without further ado, let's get to the show. So right after this break, I'll be back with a clip from the Agronomists talking about the power of rotation.
Today's show is brought to you by Alltech. Encourage you to go to alltech.com. Also joining us right now, it is Martha Baker, and she is the Alltech sales manager. Now, Helgason, that's the product?
So Helgason is a new product. It is a blend of essential oils, so it's an all-natural product, non-antibiotic, non-synthetic product. And what it does is on a dairy side, it increases fat protein corrected milk flow by 2 to 4 pounds, 1 to 2 kilos, with like 99% repeatability. On the beef side, what we see is an improvement in feed efficiency, upwards of 7%. We see an increase in ADG and fewer days on feed.
Feed additive then, or how are we incorporating it into the to the animal?
Yeah, it is a feed additive. The feed rate's only 1 gram per head on a dairy side and 200 milligrams per kilo of body weight on the beef side.
You buy one skin of that stuff and it's lasted a long time.
It does absolutely.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, February 6th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Visit kochagronomicservices.com to learn more about their products and services. All right, as promised, I've got now a couple clips from the Agronomists. We're going to learn about how crop rotation impacts soil microbial populations, and you're going to want to know why, because if we can influence what the soil microbes are doing, they will help us out when things get tough above ground. So listen now. This is my conversation with Bobbi Helgason with the University of Saskatchewan and Dave Hooker with the University of Guelph, Ridgetown. Bobbi, your work is looking at the soil aspect and so many aspects of this. When we look at sort of overall, and we are going to look at some specifics as well, but overall, what are some of the key differences that you see in the soil profile, in the microbe profile, when you've got a diverse rotation versus a more simplistic or corn on corn or corn, or wheat on wheat on wheat?
Yeah, so I think when we think microbiology and crop rotation, we're often the first default position to take is disease management or pest management. And so having the same host crop year after year after year opens the door of opportunity for pathogens to really pit in a cropping system. So that's certainly a risk with non-diversified rotations. The slant that we've been taking more so in my research program is to try to understand how different crop species form the basis for different below-ground diet, if you will, and how that affects nutrient cycling. So sort of this idea that much like us as humans, we thrive on a diverse and well-balanced diet, the soil microbiome does as well. And so if we're feeding it the same type of crop residue and live root carbon and nutrient cycling processes over and over and over again, we may well get imbalances that develop below ground.
The soil microbiome, likes diversity. Is there such thing, and I'm being so much cheeky here, but is there such thing as like junk food for soil microbes? Like, do we have good food, bad food?
No,
or not?
I think that microbial populations are so diverse that no matter what you feed them, somebody is able to sort of gobble it up. But the likelihood that you would sort of dig a trench and end up in that feeding that same population repeatedly is so greatly increased with non-diversified rotations. And what we want is to feed the whole diverse microbiome population. community, really. And so that's best served by different kinds of crop residues and other nutrient resources that are part of a diversified crop rotation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dave, tell us about some of the rotation, and we've actually got a video clip of some of the trials that you've put on as well. But what are some of the things you're measuring in the long-term rotation trials that you're working with? What parameters are you looking at to try and measure some of these differences?
Yeah, right before I get into that, though, I just have to say that I have so much respect for soil microbiologists. I just think it's just such it is just such a fascinating area. And when we look at rotational responses, quite often, like in the past, like 10 or 20 years ago, or even when I was a student, they say, well, this is a rotation effect. We don't quite understand, why this happens. And we just call it a black box rotation effect. But the more we understand about, what is actually causing some soil or crop responses, a lot of times it leads to, how like the microbiology, like the community, and just how diverse it is, and different populations that are competing for one another, and just the functional aspects too, that microbiome and how it interacts with plants, for like disease susceptibility, it reduces plant stress, drought stress. All of those can be like mitigated somewhat by microbiology. And so it's just a huge, fascinating topic. And so I'm not jealous of Bobbi, but I can really
a little bit.
What she, all right. So I just have to say that.
Yeah.
So I feel much better now getting that off my chest. Yeah, this is my crop rotation trial at Ridgetown. And when I give tours through here, I always say that this is my favorite project just because it has had so many different interesting outputs from this that growers can directly apply to their field. And this is just an overview, a drone shot of the trials. I think it was in this case, it was in mid-July or something like that, just a couple of weeks away from wheat harvest. And anyway, you can see the patchwork of different treatments and different rotations. We have 7 rotations. We have 2 different tillage systems and 4 different nitrogen treatments. And so we have quite a few different combinations, 56 treatment combinations there. And of course, the yield is an important one to measure. And we try to measure like protein and the quality of grain. But we also try to measure the soil responses as well over time. And I do that mainly in collaboration with my colleagues who are more soil focused, like Dr. Laura Vineyard and her team. And so we really look at these trials, Laura and I, as a team. I kind of focus on the crop. She focuses a lot on the soil and the soil health. And she's looking at, key measurements, soil measurements like organic matter, organic carbon, total nitrogen, and all of those by depth. And we look at soil structure, aggregate stability, those kinds of soil different measurements.
Now, Bobbi, things that you measure look a lot different for a lot of your trials. You're looking at different components and different the actual players in the soil. And so one of the things, what would be when you're looking at changes in soil based on rotation, what are some of the things that you're following? Are you looking at what would that list look like to you?
Yeah, so we mostly look at bacteria and fungi in my program. We use a number of different tools to do that. So some of them are by using their DNA, some of them are using different components of their cells. But we always try to do that extra step of pairing it with their function. So rather than just saying who's there and trying to infer what that means about impacts of crop rotation, for example, or fertilizer management, we also try to measure things like enzyme activity that tell us about nutrient turnover or actual nutrient pools available and total nutrients. And so we then try to relate, okay, treatment A and treatment B have different memberships of these populations, and does that correlate to not only what we see with respect to yield, but also, for example, nitrogen cycling processes or carbon storage, for example.
rotation differences, tillage differences, and nitrogen differences, and we'll certainly talk about some of those. These are the things that you're measuring. Walk us through what this looks like and some of these findings that you've got.
Yeah, so this is a graph that I just show a lot just because it resonates so well with producers. It's something that they can measure, of course. It's something that we can measure quite readily. And it's because of some of the long-term effects, of course, that we have been seeing in our crop rotation trials. These long-term trials, they are just incredibly valuable because they can answer the long-term questions. And sometimes, a system does need a period of time between 10 and 15 or sometimes 20 years to equilibrate once it's changed. Like, for example, if a tillage system changes. And so it takes time, for that system to equilibrate. And what we've seen in these trials is we've seen that rotations with wheat in them increases both corn and soybean yields. So these are corn yields, and CC stands for continuous corn. And in a plowed system, averaged over the past 13 years in this data set, our average corn yield in continuous corn, 173 bushel per acre, corn soybean rotation, 165, which is similar to the continuous corn. But when we add wheat into the rotation, you can increase our corn yields, in this case, 17 bushel per acre higher than in a corn soybean rotation. And we can say the same thing, maybe not quite as much in the no-till system or in the reduced till system, but we have a positive effect by including wheat in the system. And by including wheat in the system, like, sure, enterprise analysis is important, but wheat should be given the credit for higher corn and soybean yields.
In a no-till system, the continuous corn really has a much lower yield. From a microbiology perspective, what are some of the things that would contribute to a yield difference like that in a no-till system, maybe more so than in a tillage system?
Yeah, so I think anytime that we cause physical disturbance, we increase the amount of contact between crop residues and the soil. And the soil, of course, is home to all of those decomposer microorganisms. And so when we reduce tillage, one of the reasons we get carbon accumulations is because we slow down that decomposition process. The other thing that happens in no-till systems is that you can get stratification of nutrients. So in a huge biomass crop like corn, you can begin to get some imbalances of decomposition just because of, I should take that back. I don't want to say no-till causes imbalances, but tillage causes redistribution. And so that could be part of the difference there. I mean, we very strongly in the West often find that we see really positive effects of no-till. But with that big, all of that leftover corn stover, leaving it at the surface, it does slow down decomposition. And I would suspect change microbial population dynamics in the top 30 centimeters, for example. So throughout the rooting zone, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is the rotation effect in corn soybean rotation compared to continuous corn. And as you can see, the corn soybean rotation even had less yields. We had between, I think, 4 and 5% less yield in a corn soybean rotation than we did continuous corn. But when we looked at the corn soybean wheat rotation, and it's the graph just right above in the plow side, on the left-hand side, on the top left, you can see we have the rotational responses there. And our rotational responses, remember in that previous graph that we showed about, 17 bushel per acre increase in corn soybean wheat rotation compared to corn soybean rotation, a 17 bushel per acre corn yield increase. Well, this is the average across cool, hot, dry, and optimal. But in a hot, dry year, that's where we see the greatest yield increases or the greatest response, to a rotation in where we have very hot, dry stress conditions around the critical time of corn development. And this is where we see a lot of rotation effects, not only when it's dry out, but if the crop is under stress, we have data that shows that the longer the rotation that we have, or if let's say in this case corn follows wheat in the rotation, if we don't have many soybeans in the rotation, those rotations seems to be more resilient, against various stresses, whether disease stress, a nutrient stress, or say water deficits.
So, and shout out to Boo soybeans, but they don't do good things in rotation, guys. No. Anyway, I'm just kidding. No. It's my bias showing. But Bobbi, so in this discussion, and there's a few slides that we'll get to on soil organic matter, but from the soil's perspective, in a like this, a hot, dry year, or quite optimal temperatures, those sorts of things, what happens in a soil potentially that can support those crops in a tough year, in this case, a very diverse crop rotation versus not? What is happening at sort of the soil level potentially?
Well, I guess first and foremost, we know that soil organic matter holds water. So if you've got increased soil organic matter, there's increased potential to hang on to soil moisture when it's limiting. I mean, not hang on to as in withhold from the crop, but hang on to from previous precipitation events. Strong rotations also tend to have good sort of nutrient turnover dynamics. And so if you could have, for example, nitrogen mineralization chugging along steadily through a hot, dry period, that would be beneficial to the crop, because nitrogen moves very much in water in the soil. And so if you've got already like low nitrogen mobility conditions, and then you shut down nitrogen mineralization, then, cascading effects. So I haven't specifically spent a lot of time studying microbial community responses to hot, dry conditions, but certainly there are many plant growth promoting bacteria that live in and on roots, well, bacteria and fungi, and they can interact with those roots through signaling pathways in both directions to alleviate plant stress. And there's plenty of evidence for that in most cropping systems. So.
All right, so fascinating discussion there. I took a couple different pieces. So if you want to see the whole thing, which I highly recommend, because we do refer to a few slides there that are super cool that Dave and Bobbi shared with us, you can head to our YouTube channel, click on live. You'll find that episode and many more, of course, or you can head to realagriculture.com/agronomists. You'll find that episode as well as all our past episodes on that landing page as well. So you can go check it out. And hey, if you collect CEU credits, if you're an agronomist looking to collect those, you can collect those as well from watching The Agronomist. So really a fascinating discussion. I highly recommend listening to the whole thing, because of course we're just starting to understand so much of how the soil microbe population, all the nutrient cycling that it does, all the organic matter additions, the residue, how that impacts our soil, and what happens below ground, of course, then supports that life above ground. And we're really just starting to scratch the surface of understanding it. But the bottom line is the science is incredibly clear that the more crop types a piece of ground has in rotation, the more diverse, the more robust the soil microbe population becomes. And that helps when, well, things aren't ideal and you get perhaps a stress of weather or low water or ponding, all those sorts of things. And it's our soil microbes that come to our rescue. So very cool stuff. Thank you to Bobbi and to Dave for joining me on the show. Next week, we're going to talk about wheat midge. So if you're around on Monday night, check that out as well. Okay, without further ado, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with our product spotlight from Koch Agronomic Services right after this. Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on this Tuesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is all about Koch Agronomic Services and nitrogen stabilizers. And joining me on the line is Tom Barrie. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing today?
I am doing excellent. I do like to talk about nitrogen fertilizer and specifically stabilizers, so this is right up my alley. All right, so let's get into it. What should producers keep in mind going into the 24 growing season about N stabilizers?
Well, first and foremost, Lyndsey, is if you required one, right? So, the age-old motto, I guess, is kind of threefold, right? When you need to use nitrogen stabilizers, particularly urease enzyme inhibitors, which control loss of ammonia to the atmosphere through volatilization. And so first off is if you're broadcasting urea-based fertilizers, you need to use a nitrogen stabilizer. And secondly, if you place your nitrogen in bands, whether it's UAN or urea, less than 2 inches deep, that's another time when you should be concerned or consider using a nitrogen stabilizer to protect against volatilization.
Now, what are nitrogen stabilizer considerations then under, let's say, uncertain weather, particularly dry conditions, or persistent drought conditions?
Well, that brings in twofold, right? So again, the first two times when you really want to be considering them, like I said, are broadcast or shallow banded applications. But secondly, now the second consideration is drought. And the second consideration, even though we don't have a whole lot of snow right now, is if you are in an area that has moisture, is denitrification or leaching, even though leaching doesn't occur as much as people think it does in Western Canada. But that's when you want to use a product that has a nitrification inhibitor in it. So first off, if you take a look at, say, very, very dry conditions, it's a kind of a twofold problem. Some farmers this year in extremely arid areas are going to want to split apply their nitrogen, i.e. put half of it down with the drill and then wait for rain to see the other half. Now, if you're putting that first half down, whether UAN or urea, down the pipes through your drill, and it's deeper than 2 inches, you don't need to use a nitrogen stabilizer. But if that second half, when we do get that rain, and you're going to top dress it, that's when you're going to want to use nitrogen stabilizers such as Agritane or Anvil for volatilization.
I love that you're that confident we're going to get moisture. We need that optimism. So keep it up.
Hey, Lyndsey, there's been hoarfrost. Everybody is writing it down on their calendars. We all do it.
We all do it.
It always rains.
Whether it actually works or not.
Yeah, that's why we're in agriculture.
That's right.
We're eternal optimists.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so definitely, I mean, you got to think through that process of, so if you're broadcasting, you've got a product. If you're putting it down, but maybe not deep enough, definitely something to consider. Drought plays another role there, as does split application. So a lot of things to work through. So remind us then, what products from Koch Agronomic Services should farmers be considering as they sit down to work through these scenarios?
Well, it's all really about what your loss potential is, right? If it's going to be drier or you're going to broadcast or apply shallow, you're going to want to just use a urease enzyme inhibitor such as Anvil or Agritane. But if you are in an area, and there are a few that have decent moisture and some snowfall, and we're probably going to get more of that as well, you're going to apply in the spring on soils that are moist, and you do have a general, soil climatic zone area that you're probably going to get more moisture in the more arid areas. Then you want to consider a product that is a dual inhibitor. So for ourselves, we have one called Super U, which is a pre-made urea that contains agrotane, or NBPT, and as well dicyandiamide, which is DCD, which is for denitrification. And we also have a product called Tribune, and Tribune is for UAN, and it's got agrotane, or NBPT, in it, as well as pronitridine, which is our brand new molecule, which powers our product for anhydrous ammonia named Centuro. So if it's wet or going to be a little bit more moist in the spring, you're going to want to use a dual inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. And if it's on the drier bias, you're going to want to use a urea enzyme inhibitor. But as we've mentioned before, there are many imitators in the market. Watch what you're spending your dollars on.
Right, because all products, of course, not created equal. What makes Koch Agronomic Services products unique from maybe some of the others on the landscape?
We're very confident that our rates are the proper rates, and they are higher rates than many products in the market, especially with our dual inhibitor Super U. There's many imitators. There is, 5 to 10 times more DCD in Super U than there are in imitator products on the market in some cases.
Alrighty, so know what you're buying and talk to your reps out there. Tom, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
All right, thanks so much, Lyndsey. Have a great day.
I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products. Each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's KOCH ag.ca.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's strong portfolio of wheat, durum, barley, oats, peas, and rye, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. They've got seasonal solutions for your success. Visit kochagronomicservices.com. That's Koch, K-O-C-H. All right, we're going to travel now in time as well as space to the trade show floor at Manitoba Ag Days that was held last month. Kelvin Heppner's got a fabulous report from the floor talking about grain grading potentially one day at the Combine.
For RealAgriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner. We are in Brandon at Ag Days and pleased to be joined now by Divyesh Patel, Chief Operating Officer with Ground Truth Ag. And Divyesh, we're in the Innovation Showcase area here, and you're showing off one of your new products. Can you fill us in on what this machine is and what you're trying to accomplish with it?
Absolutely. So we're here showing off our reference automated grain grading system. It's a benchtop version of our automated grain grading platform. We are starting with the benchtop version. Eventually we'll have the unit on combines as well, and potentially on augers throughout the supply chain. But this first unit does all of the visual grading characteristics of Canadian Western Red Spring wheat. So right now it does about 50 grading factors that are defined by the Canadian Grain Commission: frost, mildew, sprouted grains, severe sprouts, all the impurities like sclerotinia, ergot, and all of those things. Because our rationale is that in order to really understand the grade of your grain, you need to any automated system needs to be able to do every characteristic, because any one of those characteristics can downgrade your grade.
Okay. So this is using a camera basically to replace that subjectivity of a human eye?
That's exactly right, yeah. So we use just a standard computer vision camera, and then we've built our own machine vision detection models that identify all of these characteristics. And then there's some complex math that then takes that detection and converts it into a prediction. So if you're familiar with the grading process, a lot of these things are a percentage of weight. So if you're looking for start grass green kernels, you actually have to weigh the kernels, and that's a little difficult to do when we're just taking an image of it. So we have to come up with our own way of making sure that that image translates to the percentage that's required to actually do the grade.
Okay. Would you put this in the category of AI?
Yes, it is in the general category of AI. We don't really use that term very often because I don't think a lot of people care if it's what makes it work. It's more that it does work, and that's the most important part for us. Okay. I will say though that the just on the technology side, the fact that machine learning and artificial intelligence has advanced to the point that it is today is what makes our product possible. There's been similar products tried like this through the 90s and even more recently than that. But I would say, even about 5 years ago, the base technology that we used to build our product wouldn't have been possible.
Okay. So we, of course, have heard stories from farmers of taking grain to 2 different elevators, being graded by 2 different people, and coming from the same field, the same bin kind of thing, and grading differently. What kind of variability is there in this relative to what we might see from a human standard grading, the type of grading we've done until now?
Yeah, that's a really difficult comparison to do because, we know our computer vision models have very high precision and recall as the measurements. Like we know that if the factor that we're looking for is in that sample, we're more than 90% likely to identify it. And when we identify an impurity, we're more than 90% likely to get it correct. But understanding what the baseline of a human is not as easily characterized. But I will say that, when we run the same sample through our unit, like over 99% of the time, it'll give you the same result. Okay. So as long as the sampling was done correctly, there's so many other sort of potential places for error in the process but we're hoping to remove one of them.
Okay. So where do you see this being commercialized or being used in the industry? Is this farmers going to have something like this in their shop, or is this more at the elevator in the grain industry side of things?
Yeah, I would love to see it in every place where people want to understand the grade of their grain, but I suspect that the use case for a farmer might be in a farm that's capable of doing some blending. If they can understand what is in one area of their storage and wants to improve the quality of a particular bin, they could do some blending. Initially, though, I expect that it'll be found in grain elevators where, during harvest you have to process hundreds of samples a day, and we can do it in 2 minutes as opposed to a human grader that might take 9 or 10 minutes. And so I don't know that we'll necessarily replace graders. We'll just augment their skills, and they won't have to look for all of the factors. They could look for the ones that our unit doesn't do as well and focus on those instead of the ones that we can sort of tear out in a minute. We see it as a tool, not necessarily a replacement.
Yeah, augmenting, like you said. Yeah.
Augmenting is an excellent word for that.
So, do you face any regulatory hurdles in terms of grain elevators using this if they are going to not have as much of the human element involved?
The regulatory environment for grain grading is very complex and it's an important part of it to ensure that those transactions are consistent and everyone understands what they'll be getting. So I don't see us displacing any of the current processes that have to be in place to meet the regulations, but between a buyer and a seller, if they agree with the results of our unit, they can use that as an additional piece of data to ensure that the transaction is smooth.
Okay. you mentioned before, kind of in passing, and we haven't talked about it, this is the bench version, but you're also looking at having this technology applied in more real time in the field in a combine?
Yeah, we've tested on the combine for 2 years now. We think the technology is working fairly well there, but being that it's on the combine, we have to make sure it's a little bit more ruggedized than the benchtop version, so we're going to do another year of field trials. But the advantage of the on-combine one is, yes, you can get some real-time data, which is excellent, but in addition to that, you can also have localized information about your quality throughout your field. Things like protein, for example, we did a little study this year during harvest. We'd hand harvested a small field plot, and we found significant variation, even within 20 yards. The protein concentration would go from 17% to 12%. So there's significant variability in factors like that, and we suspect that all of the visual characteristics that we grade will have that kind of variability as well. So potentially, if you understand that you have more undeveloped kernels in a particular part of your field, maybe that changes the way you apply chemical, or
which bin you put it in.
Or what bin you put it in. So there's a number of different ways that we think you can improve your grain handling process, or hopefully your agronomy practices, to kind of address those things in the future.
All right. Very interesting. Well, stay tuned to see where it goes. Thanks for your time, Divyesh.
Absolutely. Thank you for stopping by our booth.
With that, we're going to take a very quick break, and I'll be back for the last segment here on RealAg Radio to talk with Stuart Chutter about how to manage the losses brought about by drought stress with a new product through AFSC. We'll get to that right after this.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. All right, we do know that Western Canada, parts of Western Canada, under severe drought stress, not just last year, but frankly, only just a few years before that. We know that there are federal programs that can kick in under disaster situations, agri-recovery being one of them. But of course, there's a role for provincial insurance programs here, and Alberta has made some significant changes to one of its products that really made a difference last year in what producers were paid out. And there's some significant changes in not just how AFSC figured out whether or not farmers or ranchers were owed a payment, but actually instituted payouts way earlier in the season, so not at the end of the season. So to talk about what this product is and the changes that were made and how it played out for Alberta producers in 2023, I'm joined now by Stuart Chutter. He's the Senior Policy Analyst with AFSC. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so not a great 2023 season when we think about moisture. But, and maybe that's an understatement for some people, so I apologize. But it was a year that some ranchers in Alberta had access to a different product, and we've got now some numbers on what that might have looked like for their risk management. So Stuart, walk us through this product and sort of what 2023 taught us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Lyndsey. I'm really excited to share the story of the 2023 moisture deficiency insurance product. And not because it was a good year for a lot of producers or something to celebrate, but celebrating an evolution of a product and how it has evolved and changed to really serve industry. The moisture deficiency insurance product, that's our probably more commonly known in Alberta as pasture insurance. Mm-hmm. And it's a proxy-based insurance product, meaning it's not based on the actual yield of what's being insured, but rather based on other variables that give an idea of what yield or production will be. So that's the challenge with pasture insurance is we can't measure the actual yield because a cow has eaten it or a sheep has eaten it.
Yeah.
So how do we create an insurance product that accurately assesses yield, but without having access to that yield information? And so that's where the MDI or moisture deficiency insurance product has a place where we can insure pasture, but use weather variables, so precipitation, heat, to capture the variables that will give us an expectation of yield. Mm-hmm. In the 2023 year, we can look at the results of this product, which has been around since 2005, and we can see the changes that have happened to this product with industry consultations. And it shows us great results of an evolving product that's now there to serve industry. And that's what I really want to highlight or champion today, because with some insurance products, as they evolve, there's a reputation of, oh, it didn't work. I heard from somebody who used it that it didn't reflect on what actually happened on the farm, or it's not a product that works for us. And some key changes, especially in 2022 and 2023, have now been implemented into the MDI product. And we saw the results of those changes during 2023's drought. And the product for 2023 paid out $326 million to Alberta's pasture producers. And that is a significant increase from prior years, and just something tremendous for livestock producers and grazers across the province.
So, I mean, realistically, and as you put it, it may not necessarily work for every producer, but, part of that is this is, an insurance product, meaning if it doesn't work, it may mean that you had the production there, you had the moisture there, that your overall production wasn't hurt. So hopefully that manages out, but I'm going to assume you'd have to run some of those numbers to make sure. But as you point out, I mean, 326 million is a significant amount of money going out to producers who use this for 2023. So there's also some numbers though to compare, because we do talk about, other risk management programs, perhaps national, the provincial, federal programs that can come into play, but don't always. How would a product like this stack up against, the possibility of waiting for, one of the national programs to kick in?
Yeah, great question. And that's where we get to start looking at the results of 2023 and see, what support are these business risk management programs providing to our livestock sector and pasture producers. So just some background context, that $326 million that was paid out through the MDI program in 2023's drought, that's about triple what was paid out in 2021's drought.
Oh, wow.
So both drought years, but nearly 3 times the amount of support to industry in 2023. And that's because of changes to the program that were made in 2022 when extreme heat and minimum daily thresholds were added to the program. So we were trying to instead of just taking precipitation as the indicator of growth, how can we get closer to plant available precipitation? If it's so hot that there's evapotranspiration, or if the daily rainfall is so small that it's not actually getting into the soil, let's correct for that and try and get closer to that plant available moisture. So that was a big change to the program in 2022. And that's where we see some of that massive change to support to industry in that total payout to pasture producers. And your question about, comparing it to other risk management programs, like in Alberta this year, we had an agri-recovery for drought for livestock producers, paying out $150 a cow for qualifying regions. But if we look at the MDI product and producers who participated in that, if we take that $326 million in payouts, and we know that 39% of Alberta's pastures were insured through the program, if we make the assumption that 39% of pasture land corresponds to 39% of Alberta's cow herd, which I don't know that to be necessarily true, but if that's a reasonable assumption, that $326 million in support during drought would correspond to approximately $520 per cow for those producers who were enrolled in the MDI product. So almost 4 times as much as what producers receive through agri-recovery. And the other thing to keep in mind is that support for those who participated in the product, they got their payments in monthly installments throughout the summer as precipitation was measured or weather variables were measured. So instead of waiting until fall for a potential agri-recovery response, those producers were getting checks in June and July dependent on their local weather station data, so they could make feed purchases and feed decisions promptly through the growing season as they were experiencing drought. So not only a significantly more magnitude of support in about $520 per cow, but also much more timely, so that feed can be secured and purchased when it's available.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually was one of the things I didn't know, and it is a big concern, certainly, with livestock. They need to eat every day, and they don't give a hoot as to whether or not you've got insurance to cover it. But also a lot of these programs take a long time to even kick in, and certainly, we saw last year there was a big delay in actually accessing the agri-recovery program. There's no guarantee that it will kick in every year, depending on the state of the pasture conditions or the drought. And so there is, a lot of uncertainty. And then added to that is exactly that. As I understand it, you have to apply for agri-recovery after the program is in place, and then you've got to wait for your funds to come through as well. So that becomes even more time that you have to try and feed these animals potentially in a drought scenario. So super interesting stuff. Now, a question for you, of course. If farmers and ranchers are interested in potentially accessing this program, I'm going to guess there's a deadline they need to know about. When is that?
Exactly. Great point. So to get enrolled for the 2024 growing season, the deadline to enroll is February 29th. So details are available online at afsc.ca, but visiting your local branch and talking with your local relationship manager of insurance will be able to go through those details of the product and understand how it can situationally best fit for your farm or ranch, and the finer decision making of how to implement the program on your farm. All
right, Stuart, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for another edition of Tuesdays with Lyndsey. Big thank you to Koch Agronomic Services for sponsoring today's show. We really appreciate it. A reminder, head on over to kochagronomicservices.com to check out all the goods. We know that protecting nitrogen fertilizer is a huge, huge undertaking, and they can make it easier. So there you go. If you've got any feedback on today's show, give me a shout, lsmith@realagriculture.com. Of course, you can find us across social media at RealAgriculture. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. We're there. Heck, we have a TikTok account. Can you believe it? Or if you like the old-fashioned telephone, you can call us 855-776-6147. I will be back for the issues panel. Oh my goodness, we missed that last week. And so I'll be back on Friday. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Authority 480 herbicide from FMC. Authority 480 herbicide delivers outstanding control of the toughest broadleaf weeds in wheat, pulse crops, flax, mustard, and more. See your local retailer today for more information.